Now, let's look at the second question. Can you explain the basic elements of artificial neural network, in other words, ANN, architecture? Let's look at the architecture closely. This is a simple form of artificial neural network. As you see, there are some nodes, some circles, we will call them a neuron, and each vertical line is a layer in this architecture, and as you see, neurons are connected to each other. The first layer is the input layer, and the last one is output layer. Between input layer and output layer, there can be one or more layers, and we will call them as hidden layers. As you see, if you increase the number of layers, the neural network will be more deep. Or if you increase the neurons in the layer, then your network will be wider. In other words, when you add layers, your artificial neural network will be deep artificial neural network or deep neural network, DNN. Now let's look at one of the neurons closely. So this blue circle is a neuron in our network. And as you see, there can be 1 to n inputs. And for each neuron, there will be one bias. So our neuron will take these inputs, and after a couple of mathematical operations, it will generate an output. This is the basic process. But of course, there are more. This first arrow is the connection from X1 to neuron. And each connection has its own weight. The weight represents the strength of the input or strength of the connection. Let's look at this diagram. In this diagram, all of the red lines are the connections. As you see, this neuron is connected with each neuron in this layer. Or this neuron is connected with each neuron in this layer. So each connection has its own weight. Let's look at this. It will be more clear. As you see, we have one input, one connection, and connection has a value as weight. So before giving this input to the neuron, we will implement multiplication operation. So as you see here, the fx will be equal to x1 times weight 1 plus x2 times weight 2 plus until n, then xn times weight n. You can see different notations like omega, beta, but the idea is each input has its own weight. Then we will of course add our bias. Be careful, we can have multiple inputs, but we will have one bias for each neuron. The formula of that will be something like that. From 0 to n, we will implement multiplication operation for each input and its weight. Then we will add our bias. And lastly, inside the neuron, actually we have an activation function. And after the mathematical operations here, we will give the result to the activation function. And according to the activation function type, it will generate different outputs. I will elaborate the activation function types and their pros and cons in another question. So this is a simple explanation of ANN architecture and its elements.